Welcome friends to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock flavoured podcast. On this show, we're taking a trip across the USA in the company of two of my favourite Moorcock-inspired musicians to emerge from the Moonbeam Roads this past 18 months or so. First up, I'm heading to California to talk to Dave Washman about his space rock project, SÖNUS. Dave's music will be familiar to ongoing listeners, as we played the track The Eternal Champion from the debut SÖNUS platter Worlds Undreamed Of back on the birthday episode last year. I could talk about this album, but instead I'll just read this review from the Stoner Hive blog, as it sums it up far better than I could. On Worlds Undreamed Of, the first release by one-man project SÖNUS, Dave Washman, the man behind it all, comes across as a doom metal poet, a space rock prophet and a troubadour of despair. Moving effortlessly from Dave Windorf-inspired vocals and lyrics to Neil Young and back again, the man weaves a colourful tapestry full of adventurous rock that will have you explore the outer reaches of the universe as much as the inner workings of your heart and soul. For the journey will take you inwards and into a cellular level of contemplation, which is exactly the right thing to do during this worldwide pandemic. But don't think there is only burdensome meditation and reflection here, for the rock is hard, the metal heavy, and certain cartoon images are bound to pop up when you're lying on the floor spacing out to Worlds Undreamed Of. SÖNUS is the art we all need to pursue, and clocking in at 33 minutes, it weaves all of the bong-fueled psychedelia and space rock passages into a stunning patchwork quilt. Simply put, it's spiritually and audibly satisfying. Beautiful poetry to go with its unhurried, spacey prog. Fine words there from JK of Stoner Hive. From there, I hopped into Professor Falstaff's Buick and headed across to Queens, New York, to catch up with the man behind Imrryr, a bleak experimental electronic project inspired by Moorcock and a whole host of other sci-fi luminaries. It took a few weeks, thanks to an unfortunate invoker incident along the way, so these were recorded 5 weeks apart. Back when I first looked at music on the show and talked with the dungeon synth artist known as Elric, and Nathan, aka Coram, I had a route around the music scene for some more interesting tunes with a Moorcockian slant, and Imrryr was one of the first bands I came across. Obviously the name rang all of the right bells, as did the first release, The Dreaming City. I was also taken with the cover art and the whole aesthetic that accompanied it, and track titles like Cimmeril, The Nirain, Ariok, and Moonglum sealed the deal, so I dove in and I wasn't disappointed, and with tags like experimental, noise, electronica, and minimalist, it was right up my alley. And since then Imrryr's output has been prodigious, including a revised version of The Dreaming City. Listening to Imrryr's catalogue is a journey, and if you love evocative soundscapes, you're right in the zone. Also, for those of a gaming inclination, there are some absolute killer scores here for your gaming table. So, strap in gang, this is another long one, as we head from coast to coast in search of sonic satisfaction, and our first stop is SÖNUS. And we are back in Derry and Tom's virtual roof garden. Thank goodness it's virtual, because I can't make it all the way to California to record these things. And frankly, I don't think my guests would particularly want to come over to Bradford because it's fucking freezing over here. But welcome Dave, aka SÖNUS, and welcome to Derry and Tom's.
Hey, great to be here, virtual Derry and Tom's, talking across the Moonbeam Roads.
Absolutely, and you know what, it's great to have you, because you're actually one of our earliest friends of the show and our earliest supporters, going all the way back probably over a year now. And I remember when you did drop me a line about the show and you told me that you were, I think you were driving somewhere. Were you driving to San Francisco or something like that? And it all sounded so exotic.
Trust me, nothing exotic about that 280 traffic. But thankfully I had you to listen to make that commute bearable. Yeah, that was about 3 days a week to SFSU at the time.
So whereabouts are you based?
So I'm in Santa Clara, California, which is famous for being the birthplace of COVID in the United States. Isn't that wonderful? I had my own little hometown name checked by the president not too long ago.
Wow, that is some claim to fame. for your hometown.
Dubious.
And I understand that the chief variant in the United States now is the UK variant. So
that's right.
Hands across the ocean, man.
There you go. See, I got a little PC guys right here. Always close to my heart. Hopefully not, that close to my lungs, but,
Sure, absolutely. Now, of course, our listeners will be somewhat familiar with SÖNUS because, of course, we played one of your songs on the birthday episode and you recorded a birthday message for the man himself. So just to explain to everybody, Dave and I have got together to talk very specifically, not just about Moorcock, because, of course, it's a Moorcock-flavoured podcast, but also about Dave's music project, SÖNUS, which, how would you describe SÖNUS? Space rock? Prog rock?
Oh, yeah. Basically, it's just kind of... for me, it's just kind of an opportunity to kind of just make whatever kind of song kind of pops into my head. I've been a part of a couple music projects, and they've all just kind of been not exactly what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
This is, literally, it's just me in a freaking bedroom recording this stuff, so it's whatever comes to my mind. And if it happens to be, crazy psychedelic, Hawkwind madness, or, something more like a Motorhead, or, basically it's just all my influences and whatever pops up from them. So a lot of 70s stuff.
Yep.
That's kind of like really my preferred era, I guess, of music, you could say. Yeah.
So in terms of those, those 70s bands and that kind of genre music, what are your chief influences?
Oh, man. Well, my dad, for one, he played me Led Zeppelin in the womb. And so once you got that from birth, it's kind of, it's kind of hard to get into certain other musical forms. How do you compare with Led Zeppelin, right? But yeah. Zeppelin, Sabbath, and then on my own, I discovered, Motorhead, Hawkwind, the new wave of British heavy metal, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, stuff like that.
Yep.
So it's all just a big old mix of rock and roll history right in there.
We normally kick off this show with a key question, and I don't think we should vary from that at all today. What's your history with Michael Moorcock?
Well, let's see. So to go all the way back to the origin of why I grew my hair long and started lifting a bunch of weights in the first place, I would have to say, Conan the Barbarian really, I was 14, I saw the 82 Schwarzenegger movie, thought it was amazing, changed my life, and then I'm like, well, I gotta have more of this. And then there's comics, the Dark Horse comics, which are phenomenal. Yep. And, obviously then from there I got into the actual original Robert E. Howard stories. And, my dad had read to me Lord of the Rings when I was a kid, and I had gotten really into, like, Norse mythology and stuff like that after learning, we're Swedish, and after learning what a Swede was, I got into that.
Yeah.
But Conan completely blew me away when I read that, because before, fantasy and sci-fi to me was mostly just whatever movie came out in theaters and, my various huge boxes of superhero comics. But this was like really me starting to get into actually reading fantasy and sci-fi literature. And then from Robert E. Howard, all of his characters, H.P. Lovecraft and like the Weird Tales, Clark Ashton Smith, those kind of things I started reading. Of course, at the same time, I was discovering new music. And from Motorhead came Hawkwind. From Hawkwind, that's really where I came upon Michael Moorcock and discovered that. And so it just happened to perfectly align with the time that the Del Rey reprints of the Elric stories were coming out. So, of course, I bought all those because they did such a great job with Conan. And, I just started digging in and reading this stuff. And I remember, I think the story that really, truly got me into Michael Moorcock was While the Gods Laugh, when Elric is going on the quest for the Dead Gods book. And he, after all this misadventure, he meets Moonglum, he meets Shirilla. And finally, at the end, he comes upon the book, he finds it. He's like, okay, here's the answer to everything right here in this tome. Lifts the cover. Frickin' thing disintegrates on him. Well, isn't that just life? So that really, that was a pretty cool story. And that really kind of got me into seeing, okay, what else has this guy done?
It's funny you mentioned that because Hussein and I, of course, covered Phase 2 of the final programme a while back, and we will eventually get round to Phase 3. But the entire MacGuffin of that middle part is kind of almost like a retread of While the Gods Laugh, because it's the astronaut's journal, isn't it? And it doesn't disintegrate when they find it, but they just find that it's just filled with ha 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 from beginning to end, and this MacGuffin just gets cast aside Yeah, and it's another example of Moorcock when he's kind of, recycling himself almost. But
Yeah.
we haven't got round to While the Gods Laugh. We haven't got round to While the Gods Laugh on our grand reread, and I'm really looking forward to getting into all that stuff because I don't think we've even met Moongloom yet on our rereads. But by the way, what are you drinking?
Oh man, well I happen to have a Crazy Farm Psycho Cider, and you know they're crazy because they spell crazy with a K. So
Oh my God!
look out,
Yeah.
look out now.
Yeah.
And of course, I happened to drop this thing, knocked over with the cable here as I was going to the bathroom. So we'll see if this doesn't just explode all over the place right now. And we're good.
Oh yeah. Fair play. I was expecting you might have to shotgun the entire can for a second, but
there you go. Get the party started. Closest thing I've had to a party in about a whole year. So.
Yeah, well, we've got those to look forward to with any luck.
Yeah.
So you discover Elric, you go down that rabbit hole with the Del Rey editions. How quickly did you kind of go on the Pokemon hunt for the other bits and pieces of Moorcock and go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah, so it's so that was the other thing too. In Volume 2, actually, they have the original, I guess, short story version of the Eternal Champion.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that, and I was like, okay, well, this is another, kind of flavor of the rainbow here. Let's see what this tastes like, and I liked it. So yeah. After that, it was a little while because then I was in college, and then all the books that I were buying were just super expensive textbooks for a number of years.
Yeah.
So graduated that, and then I just got back into hunting down my local used bookshop and just seeing what they had, and they had a bunch, thankfully, of Michael Moorcock. So I got Corm, got into him, Hawk Moon, other various bits and bobs here and there. This really good collection of short stories, The Time Dweller and Moorcock's Martyrs. I got those ones, and I love those 70s DAW book covers. I mean, my God, it's so cool. They could each be like an album cover.
Yeah, those DAW covers. I think the Elric ones, they used the Michael Whelan paintings, didn't they? Which in the UK were on the Panther or Grafton, depending on the year, paperbacks. And I think my iconic Elric illustration is the Stormbringer cover by Michael Whelan. It's just absolutely beautiful. I mean, if I could invent some kind of time machine and go back in time, I would definitely burgle Michael Whelan's house when he just completed that and spirit it away and stick it on a wall somewhere. Yeah, it's absolutely fabulous. Oh, yeah. So you're growing up, you're getting into music, you're getting into Moorcock. How did you become a musician?
Right. Well, it just kind of, I always just kind of heard just various songs just kind of pop into my head, and that's still very much the case. It's kind of weird. Usually, like when I'm writing music, I'll just kind of get everything at once. It's like, boom, it just kind of pops into my brain. There it is, blaring out, and now I have to do something with it. So, I always loved guitar, being a rock and roll guy. So I remember my mom got me an acoustic guitar when I was 12, and she took me to the church that we went to at the time. Like, oh, let's get some guitar lessons going, and I wanted to learn, Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and AC/DC, and they were like, no, we're going to play Jesus Touch My Special Soul or whatever, I don't know. It was not for me. Even then as a kid, it was just not for me, and so I kind of put it down for a while. But then on my 17th birthday, she got me just straight up an electric guitar. And they always say, you should learn on an acoustic first and then go to electric so that you don't, you aren't just sloppy and you don't suck. But for me, I found finally, oh my God, I can play Hand of Doom. And that was the first riff I learned how to play was Black Sabbath, Hand of Doom. And from then I was just hooked, and I was just on that thing, hours at a time, just noodling around and, improvising and stuff like that, trying to come up with my own riffs. And I mean, and from there I was hooked. One day I decided, I should actually turn this into something, and here we are.
So I mean, just picking up on that point, I guess there must be generations of kids who picked up the guitar out there who, had they been forced to start with an acoustic guitar and not experiment with power chords, might never have gone on, to rock. Much. Yeah. So is SÖNUS your first project then, in terms of being a singer-songwriter?
I've been in a few musical projects here and there, usually not as the head guy, but just like, oh, Dave plays something, let's get him in to do it. So at first I played bass in a couple bands around here that a buddy of mine invited me to join, and they kind of went nowhere, fell apart as most bands do. And then another one I was playing guitar and bass and doing other stuff with this more kind of I guess more electronic led, kind of more psychedelic sort of thing, but it wasn't rock enough for me. All of a sudden I find myself in quarantine with nothing to do and all these song ideas that have been laying around. I have the DAW, have the recording software, have all my instruments. I know how to play everything. So, all right, let's record an album.
What you've just described is a fantastic side effect of this fucking relentless quarantine, isn't it?
True.
Because lots and lots of people have been forced into new creative ventures to avoid going bloody crackers.
Yeah.
And I know what you've created in terms of that album is creatively way more advanced and several magnitudes greater than anything I've done with this podcast. But I identify with the fact that having something to concentrate on and something to just, pour a little bit of creativity into when you can't go out and do anything or see anybody or meet family is an absolute... I mean, I'm not a religious person, but it's a godsend with a small g. It really is.
Yeah, it truly has been an amazing thing. It's something I always wanted to do. That's another thing too. I just graduated literally like a month into quarantine. I finally got my degree from SF State. So that was like one major, life thing done. And then another thing was just, I'm like, well, I really just always wanted to do music. So why don't I just make an album? I've got all this time. And, it's been great because, you will just lose days and days and days just tweaking the reverb back and forth until you're happy with it. I mean, my God, it's some tedious stuff, but it is a great time killer. Yeah. Wonderful busy work. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, it's been really cool, and I'm super glad I did it, as I'm sure everybody who goes and actually does the creative thing that they want to do is. It's just really cool.
Yeah. What's behind the name?
Oh, actually, that also comes from Michael Moorcock in a very roundabout way. So I was reading, like, the band name is the worst part, right? It's like, how do you slap a label on whatever this weird thing that I'm doing is that's going to, convey anything or even just not already be taken, right? Because everything I wanted was already taken. So I was just reading an interview with Michael Moorcock, and he was talking about a paper that he edited when he was a kid, with, like a sci-fi kind of magazine. And it was called Vox Stellarum, Voice of the Stars. And I thought, that's really cool. That'd be like a cool band name. But Vox Stellarum, Voice of the Stars, that might be a little presumptuous in my vocal abilities. So let's change that to SÖNUS Stellarum. But then it was really awkward to say, it's too many S's. And my mom couldn't even remember it. So I just shortened it to SÖNUS because it looked really cool with the font. And I was like, no, I'll put an umlaut over the O. Whatever, I'm done. That's okay.
Well, umlaut over the O makes it more metal automatically, doesn't it? But the really exciting thing about having the umlaut over the O, and I think I might have mentioned this on the birthday episode, is...
I believe you did.
I come from Hull, in East Yorkshire, in the east of England. Well, the northeast of England. Well, it's weird. It's not technically the northeast, and it's not technically the east. It's kind of between the northeast and the east. But, that's just one of those strange things about Britain and how they're named regions. But anyway, long story short, I'm from Hull. And in Hull, there's a very, very particular accent, and there's a very particular way people pronounce their vowels. There have been comedic Hull speak manuals and things like that published over the years. But in Hull, a really hardcore Hull person wouldn't say SÖNUS, they'd say SÖNUS. So they pronounce O almost like a long ER. In Hull, you would say, if you're after the shop, you say, I'm going on road. If you're from Westall, if you're from Eastall, you say, I'm going on raid. So an umlaut over an O, and I looked this up at the time, means that you pronounce the O, So, yeah. So it makes it sound, if you say it like that, it makes it sound like you're from Eastall. So all of a sudden, sounding like you're from Eastall becomes justified and metal. That said, there are many times I wish Eastall would sink and float away into the North Sea. So let's not get too excited about it. And I won't go into the rivalries that exist from West Hull to East Hull, because Hull's divided by a river called fortunately enough, the River Hull. And if you're west of the river, you're black and white, and if you're east of the river, you're red and white, and it's an old sporting rivalry that goes back a long way. However, just for the sake of being from Hull and not in Hull, I can kind of share that heritage with the red and whites on the other side of the river, who normally I probably wouldn't want to spend any time with. But that's a different story altogether. So yeah, kind of got off on a bit of a rambling sidebar stroke tangent there. But yeah, SÖNUS, great name. So you've come up with a name. You've got some thoughts in your head, you've got some inspirations. What's your process? How do you go from having these ideas in your head, and particularly when they're so directly inspired and influenced by things like Robert E. Howard and Moorcock? What's the process? Because to a non-musician like myself, it seems like alchemy or magic.
Yeah. Well, I guess mine's like a little bit different. I think a lot of people usually they'll start with like the lyrics first. I actually do the lyrics like very last. That's like the last thing before I actually record the vocals, and that's the final thing. So usually for me what will happen is I'll just be sitting there or at working some kind of job, just spacing out, and all of a sudden, boom, blaring into my head like the cosmic trumpets of some great deity just comes this amazing, well, hopefully amazing to other people too, but amazing to me at the time, sound, and then it's everything going at once. So, then once I kind of have that sound going in my head, then it's like, oh crap, okay, now I have to like parse through this and pick out, okay, what's the actual guitar line playing here? What's the bass line doing? What are the keyboards or synths doing, if there are any? What's the beat? What are the drums doing? Is there a vocal? What's the vocal I can put over this? So it's kind of like just this big blaring mess that comes into my head, and then I got to try and hopefully actually be able to play what I'm hearing, or at least as close to it as possible. And that's kind of fun, Then it's just kind of like, it's like someone just threw a jigsaw puzzle on the floor and it just splattered everywhere, and you know what the image is that you're trying to put together, but now you got to pick up all the pieces and stuff. So that's kind of how I approach it. And then once it's kind of finished there, then it's just kind of, okay, how do I make this sound interesting or like not be boring, or, what's another part, here, then it just becomes the more kind of, all right, typical songwriting kind of stuff. But yeah, for me, that's usually how it happens.
So, you take a song like Out of the Eternal Champion. Have you got that concept based upon that story or that kind of iconic figure or whatever it is in your head before you create the lyrics? Or before you create the song? Or do you create the song and then think, right, what can I match to this? Where does the inspiration kind of jump in?
So once I've actually got like the thing kind of recorded, then I just kind of listen to it and I think, okay, what is this? What images pop into my brain? Because I'm a very visual person. When I've got the sound, I've also generally got certain sort of images, almost like it's like a soundtrack to something, kind of popping through my head. So, for the Eternal Champion, actually originally I think the images I had were kind of more about Elric and Imrryr, and that was like its original title. But as I was writing it, the middle changed because the bass line I wanted to do I just couldn't get a good take on, but I actually, I was just kind of jamming around and I got this other thing. So instead of going to this sort of like Iron Maiden, Steve Harris kind of grooving thing, which I just was not able to do convincingly enough to myself, I kind of brought it down to this more dirgy kind of thing, and then it became this whole big dramatic, almost Pink Floyd sounding kind of thing. Yeah, and then from there I started getting more of like the Eternal Champion kind of vibes, just being pushed through the cosmos from body to body, and just this crazy like never-ending struggle and trying to return to a place, and this whole thing that just blew me away when I read the story, when I was like 16. I don't know, that's where my brain went there, and that's where the lyrics came in.
Yeah. So you've got your Moorcock influence on there, but for someone who hasn't been exposed to the album yet, what are the other core influences for that album? Which is, of course, is called Worlds Undreamed Of. We have not actually mentioned the name, haven't we?
That's true.
and for everybody who's listening, get on Bandcamp, find SÖNUS, and it's Worlds Undreamed Of. But what are the other key influences?
Gotcha. So right after the Eternal Champion is the Hour of the Dragon, which basically is just a straight up, like if I was like a bard retelling the Legend of Conan, it is that book basically just kind of summarized into what I hope is a badass heavy metal song. And that was really fun to do because I of course I came with the music first. I have like the guitars and the synths, and there's this really cool part where they kind of like interweave that I'm super proud of. Anyway, I'm just like, this sounds like an epic soundtrack to some like great desert battle or something. And then,
Yeah.
I just happen to have Carl Edward Wagner's version of The Hour of the Dragon just sitting right on my nightstand, and I'm like, that's the one. It's got to be Conan and his most epic tale yet. So then I kind of try to do my best to translate the whole story of that big long book into a song, and I'm pretty proud of that one. I think that's probably like the best song on the album, I gotta say.
I have fist pumped the air to Hour of the Dragon. I've just got to point that out. Yeah.
There you go. Happy to hear it.
It's a mighty tune. It's a mighty tune.
Awesome. Yeah. So Robert E. Howard, Heavy Metal Magazine, and the movie, just like that whole just style, just weird sci-fi, strange landscapes and things like that. So there's a bit of that, like an Astral Projector. And World's Undreamed Of, the title track and the final one, which is the super chill, relaxing kind of fade out. It's kind of like my Planet Caravan. Mm-hmm. I kind of think of it. Yeah, that one's basically just kind of like kind of just an ode to fantasy itself. Here I am sitting in my room watching the whole world fall apart, and what do I have but my music and my books to kind of keep me sane. That was kind of what that one was about. And then Rock and Roll Necromancy is just, it's kind of a tribute to some of my heroes that we lost. Lemmy, David Bowie gets a mention. Just the fact that everyone keeps saying, oh, rock's dead, but it's not. So I'm going to revive it like a necromancer, I guess, if it is dead.
Yeah.
So that's what that's about. And it's just, that's just a fun song.
People say that every few years, don't they?
They always do.
Some fucking wise ass critic will, or somebody with an axe to grind, or somebody who just wants some fucking attention will say rock is dead, and it's bullshit. Yep. Rock will never die.
Never die. I've been saying that since the '60s, and guess what? Guess how many rock and roll bands are out there? Maybe not at the Grammys, but
yeah, you know what? I think, of course, you're on Bandcamp, and Bandcamp is a fucking treasure trove of rock music. Truly. It's absolutely staggering how much great stuff there is on there. I think some of my favourite stuff I've come across, and I buy whenever they come out, is the Doomed and Stoned compilations.
Yeah.
Which are absolutely phenomenal. And I think there's something like 16 or 17 of those now, with 80-odd unique songs by unique artists across all of those. And when I started looking at, kind of like the Moorcock stuff, just go on Bandcamp and search Melnibone, or Melnibone, for example, and see how many hits come up. It's absolutely crazy. Yeah. Not just rock music, but there's a absolutely fantastic, I say band, but again, it's one guy creating music called Imrryr, and it's did an album called The Dreaming City, like an album of experimental electronica. There is so much great stuff out there. There's a Ukrainian band called Hawk Moon Moor, who don't seem to have done anything new for quite a while, but they did an EP which is purely Moorcock focused, with one exception, which is something to do with Frodo Baggins. And there's just so much great stuff out there, and my God, Bandcamp is a rabbit hole in and of itself. It's incredible.
It truly is. And I mean, and you do really get this overwhelming sense that, rock specifically is nowhere near dead. It's just, it's just sleeping, it's waiting, it's biding its time until, it comes back in a big way. Because, I've never been a hip-hop guy. I've never really been into a lot of the pop stuff. But I got to imagine, these things kind of go in cycles, right? I mean, like, look at bell-bottom jeans. They're back, And I already had a pair of hand-me-downs from my dad, which I've been rocking for years now. All of a sudden, now I'm high fashion. But, these things just go in cycles. And, we're seeing, like, bands like Greta Van Fleet becoming big names, I guess, being all over the news and magazines and things like that. So I think there really is kind of a sort of budding resurgence in that kind of thing. Because, what are you going to do? Where are you going to turn to for, music these days? It's all just sounds kind of the same now. So you need something new, which was old but is new again now because it hasn't been around for a while, to come in and freshen things up, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you mention the return of bell bottoms. I'm actually old enough to remember them last time round. Although I was too young to have a pair, but I do distinctly remember them. And I don't know if it was a thing elsewhere, but in all we called them wafters. And wafters, yeah,
I like
because
that.
they would waft about in the breeze.
Yeah.
And I think I don't recall seeing any recently in Bradford. I don't recall seeing any in Hull. But I think wafters, stroke flares, stroke bell bottoms these days, I think you'd have to have a very specific aesthetic to be able to carry that off. And if you're a rocker or you're a member of Cathedral or any of those bands, then by God, you can get away with it. You can get away with it, and I will celebrate and fight for your right to wear wafters. Wouldn't work for me because I'm a fat guy and I've got fat legs, and you don't want to see fat blokes in wafters. But yeah, I'm all for it. So, SÖNUS, what's next?
Well, actually, I've got about 2 more vocal tracks that I got to finish for 2 different songs on the next EP, and then that thing's pretty much in the can and ready to go. Get sent off to mixing and mastering. So that was really cool. I had 2 old tracks that I recorded with some friends of mine in a project that I was in with them. That I just got those ones back, and these were pretty cool songs. So I was really happy to be able to get the opportunity to finish them, do them right, make them rockin'. And one of them I'm thinking is like gonna be like my masterpiece. My current masterpiece, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get that one right now, nailed down that one. But yeah, pretty much that one it's going to be called Usurper of the Universe, and it's got this, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I thought of that title, probably after a big bong rip or something a few years back, and it was just so cool. I had to finish that song, so I finally got the ability to do that. And I just got, actually, the album art I'll have to show you. It looks kind of like a Mayflower, Michael Moorcock meets Edgar Rice Burroughs, kind of meets Conan sort of thing. It looks like a heavy metal magazine comic. So it's totally like just a cartoony comic book kind of aesthetic I'm going for. This one's going to be like a bit more fun. I feel like the first one was maybe a little too serious at times. This one's got a few more rockin', kind of almost silly songs, so it's going to be fun.
Well, you know what? It sounds really positive and exciting because nobody ever likes to worry or get angsty over their difficult second album. And if you're full of beans and excited about it, and you've got a new angle, and if you've got a title like Usurper of the Universe, you're not going to go far wrong.
There you go. Yeah, I'm pretty excited. It's going to be fun.
So, what are the timescales on that being available?
Oh yeah. So, well, let's see. I'm having it mixed and mastered at the end of this month. So, it's good for me to get a deadline because I'm a horrible procrastinator, and I'll just let this stuff sit for, weeks and not touch it, and then I'll go back. So, gave myself a deadline, end of April, that's it. I got 2 more vocal tracks, and then just whatever other kind of little finishing touches I want to put here and there. So then the album will be mixed and mastered, take like a couple weeks or something, and then from there, we will see. I might shop it around to some record labels, because it's good to get some help with these things, especially from a promotional or physical release kind of standpoint, because man, that stuff is expensive. I mean, for like 100 vinyls, it's like $2,000 or something like that. It's insane, So being one man in a band, that means all the expenses fall on my shoulders there. So I do the best I can, but it's especially during a pandemic, it's a little that becomes a little bit more difficult. But yeah, I'm thinking around May or June it'll be out. I also want to build up some promotion this time a little bit, release some singles, and just kind of build up some excitement. Because the first one I was just, drunk on my birthday, and I'm like, publish, it's there, go buy it. Who? I don't know. So I want to put a little bit more thought into the release this time. So, yeah.
Are people connecting with it though?
Yeah, it's really weird. I mean, I'm really not like a big social media guy, but social media is the only way you kind of, I guess, spread this stuff around these days. So I'm always amazed, even like the other day someone bought it, and I was like, where did you even hear this from? Like, how? How did you even find this? So somehow, some way, people are still finding it here and there, but it's definitely, that's the toughest thing. It's not the hours and hours that you spend actually learning the instruments. It's not the additional hours you spend writing the songs and the additional hours you spend recording and mixing and doing all this other stuff. That is the challenge. It's the, okay, you've done all that. You've got, your finished work. Now, how do you actually get people to listen to it?
Mm.
Now, that's the challenge. That's the thing I'm trying to figure out now. So
yeah. I mean, you've had some cracking reviews. I've spotted you referencing some of those reviews, but yeah, it's a tricky thing, isn't it? You get it out into the world, but who's watching?
Yeah.
Who's looking in that direction at that specific moment?
Yeah.
To pick up on it. Yeah. But it deserves to be heard because it's fucking fantastic. And I suppose our local equivalent of your highway going up to San Francisco is the M62. Which connects the east coast and the west coast of the UK right up here in the north. And for many years, that was my commuting route. And that's what I would do with the majority of my music listening. And I'm kind of looking forward to the point where I've got a long run, I've got a long drive, and I can stick Worlds Undreamed Of and slap the volume up nice and loud in my A6 and probably head to the seaside for fish and chips, but by God, rock out on the way there. Yeah.
Oh, man, fish and chips sounds good.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, there's like a connection with the British seaside and rock music and metal, because when I was a kid, in fact, when I was a teenager, whenever you went to a seaside town, like some of our local seaside towns were places like Bridlington and Scarborough and Whitby, the kids who were manning the burger stands or the ice cream parlours or any of those things were all depressed, spotty teenagers in Iron Maiden T-shirts or Motorhead T-shirts, and seaside towns were a hotbed of young metal kids, and the best metal nightclub I ever came across was in Scarborough. It was absolutely superb. So that I always connect good quality rock music and metal with the coast. Always have done, and I'll never shake it.
That's awesome. Yeah, San Francisco also is a pretty big kind of underground heavy metal area. I mean, Metallica's from there.
Yeah.
High on Fire, they're a big band these days. They come from Oakland, San Jose, stuff like that. So this whole Bay Area it's pretty big with that, but it's not quite you don't really see out and about a whole lot that's a metal guy all that often, as much as you'd think, unless you're going to an actual show.
Yeah.
And then you realize, oh yeah, no, there's a thriving community here for this kind of music. And it never went away.
It's peculiar, isn't it? Because now, there was a time, not so much now, but round about 7 or 8 years ago, things like Iron Maiden T-shirts became like a fashion accessory.
Yeah.
Where people were almost, just in the same way that when I was of an age, people were buying second-hand Paisley kite-collared shirts from a place called Fanthorpe's in Hull. But it was more commoditised than that. But when I was a teenager, if you were a metalhead, you looked like a metalhead. You looked like a metalhead, you looked like a goth, you looked like you were a punk, and everything was very clearly defined in those days, whereas everything's become disappointingly homogenised now.
Yeah.
Which I think is a shame, and I kind of miss that. I miss being able to identify people's passions and desires kind of straight away. I mean, there were always ups and downs to that. I can remember some of the kids I knocked about with were punks, and this was certainly something you could get away with in those days, not so much now. But one of them used to, he painted these Doc Martens. He had, 24-roll knee-high Doc Martens that all the punk kids used to wear with drain pipe jeans. And he had a Star of David on one boot and a swastika on the other. And when you think back, it's like, right, yeah, there was this strange kind of uniform mentality with the kind of things you were into, and it got quite outrageous, and you kind of in ways that you would not only would you never see anymore, but nobody would ever get away with that anymore. This guy is now a teacher and he's married with kids, and he was never anything other than an anarchist, just like a naive anarchist, and that kind of naive anarchism was all over the place when I was a teenager, but it was always accompanied by fucking great music. Really great music. And the great music's still there. You've just got to dig a lot harder to find it.
For sure. Yeah, that is, that's something I definitely do as well. Just, wear the influence, on my sleeve, on my shirt, on my jacket, wherever I can put it.
Yeah.
There's the influence, man, right there. Yeah, but it is kind of weird. I think like it becoming like this fashion statement. I think honestly, most of that just kind of goes back to how effective and awesome the album art and the logos were. You know, I mean, think of Iron Maiden. I mean, that's what got me into them was the awesome album artwork. Like, I look at it, I'm like, I gotta know what this sounds like.
Yeah, same here. I was 11 and I saw the album cover to Killers in a Hull record shop, a well-known and well-loved Hull record shop called Sydney Scarborough's, which we all affectionately knew as Sid Scabs. And yeah, just as an 11-year-old looking at the cover to Killers and just suddenly becoming obsessed with Derek Riggs.
Yeah.
And even to the point where I would put Derek Riggs' little motif that he had on all his pictures, like his kind of weird signature symbol. I had that on all my exercise books. I had it on my kit bag. I had it everywhere. I would draw it absolutely everywhere. Yeah, I was obsessed with Derek Riggs. I think it was a real shame when they stopped using him. But he's still out there, isn't he? And he's still making a few quid off the Eddie brand. You know,
that's
good
right.
luck to him. It's a shame that I do really appreciate that vinyl has come back. So, you know, not just vinyl, but some of the vinyl now, the 180 gram vinyl is of such good quality as well.
Man. Unbelievable.
But it's nice to have album sleeves, gatefolds, and all that business. It's really, really lovely thing to have. There's nothing better than a nice gatefold sleeve.
Right back here, you can see my vinyl collection.
Nice.
I'm a fan myself. Yeah. There really is nothing like it. And you know that I think also it is very prevalent in the rock and roll community, but it really does. It kind of just speaks to the album as a piece of art. You know, it's something you want to hold. It's something you want to look at as you're listening to it. It's a whole nother experience, just like an actual paper book. You know, you just can't quite replicate that like digitally. It's just not the same. It's like kind of empty calories. You know what I mean? It's like you're drinking it, okay, but it's. There's something about it that just you can't replicate.
No, you can't. A few years ago, we went to a place called Grimsby, and funnily enough, Phil's from Grimsby. Oh. And Grimsby is separated from Hull by whereas Hull is separated into east and west by the River Hull, which is fairly narrow. Hull and Grimsby are separated by the River Humber, which is probably 3/4 of a mile wide. It's a big river, 3/4 of a mile wide at its widest. Certainly at the point where you're kind of looking at Grimsby from Hull. So although we lived in towns or cities that were only maybe separated by 1.5 miles or something like that. When we were kids, there was no bridge. So all there was a paddle steamer. This makes me sound really fucking old, I should point out. But anyway, I'll get to the point. So we went to Grimsby to see Anvil a few years ago. Me and some of my mates. And Anvil played in a Hells Angels club in Grimsby. They were supported by a young German thrash metal band called Rosette, and they were absolutely awesome. They were so energetic and so excited to be there. And there was only about 20 people watching at that point. There was only about 50 people in when Anvil were playing, but there was only about 20 people watching at that point. But they were stood up there, they were loving it, they were fucking shredding, and the songs, he would announce a new song and he would say, "This song is about nuclear war!" in a really strong German accent. It was absolutely super. Yes! Yeah! Give me more! And they had their merchandise table, and they had all 3 of their albums on vinyl. So I'm pissed up by this point. So I bought all of their albums on CD initially. Then I went back at the end of the night and bought them all on vinyl. And they were so chuffed. They were high-fiving each other that somebody had bought the vinyl. And I brought it home and I put it on. And the quality of the vinyl was just absolutely superb. And there is really truth to the fact that if you listen to something on CD, well, okay, but if you put the vinyl on, and even with the nice 180 gram vinyl, you've got that soft crackle and that warmth. It's a different experience.
It's like it brings sitting by the fire to you, even if you're not actually sitting by a fire. It's the warm crackle and pop of the vinyl. Yeah. It's really interesting too, because actually, like the vinyl, you're getting less frequencies. So the CD is actually like the highest, I guess quality you could say. It's got like basically the full spectrum, everything. Like you're not missing anything on the CD version, but it's very kind of cool how like if you actually just sort of smush in that bandwidth a little bit, you just get this perfectly, just amazingly warm sound that only vinyl can really do. It's really interesting.
It's definitely true that when the days of CD came around, I would listen to albums that I'd had for years on vinyl and hear things that I'd never heard before. That crisp, high fidelity sound. But nevertheless, there's just something warm and comforting about vinyl, and it's I don't know. I don't think I'll ever get away from it. It's like coal fires are filthy, but they're better than central heating. It's just when you brought up with it, and you kind of appreciate it, and you have all those built-in racket feelings associated with it. Oh, it's just warm. It's just great.
So I'm actually an archaeologist, and I've worked in Ireland a number of years.
Yeah.
And there is nothing like coming back from the field just soaking wet, because of course it's piss and rain most of the time.
Yeah.
And you go into a little pub and they put the peat fire on, and there's just the smell of that peat and like the warmness just sitting by like the furnace right there.
Yeah.
A couple minutes ago I was completely drenched, totally covered in mud and everything. Sit by that peat fire, get a nice Guinness, and there's just, there's nothing more comfortable in the world than that.
No, hard to beat, isn't it?
Yeah, it truly is.
It's hard to beat. When I was a kid, we had what's colloquially known as a Yorkshire range, which is the house we lived in was from I think it was built in 1895, so it was a big old Victorian townhouse. And it had a Yorkshire range in the kitchen, which was a black cast iron range with a coal fire in it and an oven and a warming drawer, as they called it. And next to it, and I would come home from school in the depth of winter, probably covered in mud or whatever, and go into the kitchen to the smell of freshly baking bread, baking in the oven by a roaring coal fire, and it's hard to beat.
Yeah,
it's really hard to beat. Yeah. So, is your degree in archaeology?
Yeah. Well, technically, in the States, it's anthropology, and archaeology is like a subset of that. It's like totally the other way around, I believe, in Europe. But yeah, so I've worked, around the Bay Area on Native American sites. I've been to Ecuador. I've worked on Incan sites, pre-Incan, Spanish colonial sites, and I've worked in Ireland a number of seasons on a Norman castle.
Yeah. In
this little town called Ballintubber, which is just the most adorable little place, and everybody there's so nice and friendly. And so I keep coming back because it's just a great little place,
Well, I look forward to your skyclad like Irish folk metal album period, going a little bit further down the line in a few albums' time. That's when you're inspired by I don't know, the Middle Ages or whatever it may be. There's tons of inspiration there as well, isn't there?
Oh yeah, that's another thing too. Like Thin Lizzy, I love that band. And Led Zeppelin, like their acoustic, sort of medieval jaunts, excursions into that sort of style. I always loved that as a kid, because it sounded medieval. And I was like, whoa, knights and swords. I love it, And the theme continues. But I mean, Worlds Undreamed Of kind of was that. Like that song is a little bit kind of like maybe a trippier version of something like that. But definitely.
So what else are you listening to at the moment then? I mean, you've talked about your original inspirations, like the older stuff, the 70s stuff. Is there any kind of modern music that's doing it for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, nowadays it's all kind of lumped under like stoner rock, but it's basically what that just means is it's bands that are really just kind of inspired by that 70s sound. And that's really like the most kind of fruitful sort of genre of heavy music, metal, rock that's kind of really going on today. And there's a ton of great bands in that. And that kind of started in the 90s, really. One of my favorites, actually, and they're just about to release like a new... Sorry, there's the cider coming up there. They're just about to release a new album of just covers of like crazy, obscure psych rock songs from the 60s, but Monster Magnet. And they're a massive influence on me.
They're still going. Yeah, they're great.
They're still going. Their last album... I don't know if I can say the title here, if the F word's gonna fly, but it's that band never disappoints. I'm a huge fan of them. They're a big inspiration on me as well, because basically, what I wanted to do was kind of like, okay, what if Black Sabbath meant Hawkwind and the Stooges? Yeah. Like, that's the band that I want to make, and they already made that band, so all of a sudden I find Monster Magnet, I'm like, what? Whoa! Yeah, this already exists. It's like perfect blend. So, them, Orange Goblin. I mean, oh my God, Sleep, High on Fire. Those are like more kind of like new. Well, not new is relative, but modern.
Yeah, well, I'm right with you on the Monster Magnet. I think I was 19 when my mate Pat went to university, and he sent me a cassette with a couple of albums on it, and I cannot for the life of me remember what was on side 2. But side 1 was Spine of God.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there was an EP before that, wasn't the Tab?
Tab, the fully instrumental one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But Spine of God was the first one I came across. And I was like, what the fuck is this? This is absolutely incredible. And I think about a year later, I wore that tape out, and about a year later, Super Judge came out, and there was just no looking back. Yeah. And I think Dopes to Infinity is one of my favourite albums of the last 30 years.
Truly.
I like a lot of their other albums. I like Power Trip, for what it was. It was much more commercial. It really launched them into the stratosphere, didn't it? But I always go back to Dopes to Infinity.
Yeah.
It's fucking fantastic.
It's truly amazing. Dave Windorf's a genius. I mean, nobody can write like him. It's just the metaphors, the imagery, the crazy comic book references. I mean, being a big comic book nerd myself, I mean, I just flipped out the first time, I heard Space Lord on the radio, like in my dad's truck when I must have been like 9 years old. We were just driving around. He was at University of Florida at the time. We were just driving around. I heard this thing, and it just stuck in my brain. And I'm like, I have to find out what that is. And literally years later, like 8 years later, I think I finally discovered, Monster Magnet, Space Lord. That's what I heard. That was this absolutely insane song that just stuck in my mind like this entire time. Yeah, big fan of them.
Yeah, great live band as well. I saw them on the I can't remember, I think it was the God Says No tour, or the one after that. I can't remember. I think it was God Says No tour. What a terrific show! That was, no frills, just balls out rock and roll. It was absolutely amazing. Yeah, I think I'm pretty much looking forward to the next Mastodon album as well. But
Mastodon's great.
Yeah, so I did get the last Monster Magnet album, funnily enough, off Bandcamp, because I stopped buying CDs a while ago and discovered Bandcamp. It's kind of become my go-to. Yeah, so I think probably between Monster Magnet, Mastodon, Crippled Black Phoenix are probably the 3 bands where everything they do is an auto-buy the moment it comes out, and I've got to have it. Yeah, so great stuff. So we've talked about SÖNUS, but of course Moorcock has been the core of so many different bands and oeuvres, and Moorcock himself is obviously a musician and a collaborator, but who for you has really nailed Moorcock?
I mean, it's a great thing when you have Blue Oyster Cult and Hawkwind, behind you, musically, and Mike's got them both, and I love both of those bands so much I can't even begin to describe. But Hawkwind truly was like a religious experience, almost like no other band, kind of like, I haven't really felt that way about a band since I heard Led Zeppelin, but I don't really remember hearing Led Zeppelin for the first time because I was a little tiny baby. But Hawkwind, I remember hearing Hawkwind for the first time, and I remember that experience. They really just did something totally different, something that's never truly been completely replicated. Hawkwind had the energy of proto-punk, which I also love. The Stooges, the MC5, big fan. Hawkwind had that energy, and they took it into the stratosphere with crazy sci-fi lyrics, fantasy. They have one of my all-time favorite guitar players, Hugh Lloyd Langton, who's a massive influence on my own playing. And just, I remember the first time actually hearing, Chronicles of the Black Sword, and just sitting there and just being blown away by this guy's solos, by the songs, staring at the album cover. It might have helped that incidentally I had taken a tab of a certain psychedelic substance. But it was a very, absolutely mind-melting experience. It was the perfect music for that time and for every other time, because you don't necessarily need any of that stuff to love Hawkwind, but if you are on that stuff, I highly recommend Hawkwind because it's perfect for it. Yeah. The layers that Hawkwind has, the synths, like, you've got Nick Turner on the flute, saxophone. I mean, my God, these guys are just absolutely insane. And then you've got, one of my heroes, Lemmy Kilmister, on the bass for, the first 4 or 5 albums there, just really just driving it, making it, Oh my God! Then you have brilliant lyrics by Robert Calvert as well, and he's his own like a brilliant frontman on his own right. Yeah, that band is truly fantastic, and through all these different years and lineup changes, you've got the constant Dave Brock.
Yeah.
Who himself just absolutely, I think, underappreciated genius. I mean, all like the best bands in the world and all that stuff like that, or best guitarists or whatever.
Yeah.
Give Dave Brock a shout out, man. That guy deserves it. He's been
Yeah,
the whole thing.
They don't get the credit they're due, do
Yeah.
they? Hawkwind. And I think in some ways they're perhaps agents of their own, not their own downfall or demise, but I think the fact that they went through distinct ages almost, or waves, is probably one of the things that maybe kind of held back that critical appraisal. But there's a lot of critical reappraisal going on at the moment. I highly recommend Joe Banks's book Days of the Underground.
Check that out.
Yeah, he's written and actually Ian Abraham's book Sonic Assassins as well is also excellent. A couple of really fantastic books on Hawkwind and I think they are getting something of a critical reappraisal now, and it's high time.
Yeah.
But I know for me personally, it's interesting that you mentioned that like you kind of came out of the womb almost with Led Zeppelin in your ears. It was similar for me in a way, but with Jethro Tull.
Nice.
So I can't remember the first time I ever heard Jethro Tull because Jethro Tull was just an ever-present in my life from the moment I was born. And my dad had, he wasn't really a rock fan, which is the interesting thing because there was every chance he could put a Jennifer Rush album on or something like that when I was a kid. But for the most part, he was a big Jethro Tull fan. And I think Jethro Tull were very, very similar in that respect to Hawkwind in that they had very, very distinct waves of sound that they went through. Also, similarly, massive lineup changes, and similarly are a band that, whilst they were super appreciated at the time, they've never really had the credit that they deserve. I think they're quite similar bands in that respect, but obviously, Hawkwind were more acid drenched. And fair play to them. I mean, I think I didn't listen to Hawkwind when I was tripping. I was probably more likely to be listening to Tangerine Dream or
also a great choice.
Yeah, on this or ever any of those things. But yeah, I don't know. I really like early Hawkwind. But I probably lose. I think I've said this before. I lose a little bit of geek cred in that I think the 80s sound for bands that were around in the 70s, I didn't take to it.
Yep,
and again, I think there's some similarity with Hawkwind and Jethro Tull again there. I think when they adopted that 80s sound and had less of the sprawling sound that the 70s albums had, that I started to lose touch with them a little bit. But very recently I did pick up the Live Chronicles. Picked that up, a second-hand copy on vinyl, and it's upstairs waiting for the next time I go up and have a vinyl session. I'm going to give it a critical reappraisal of my own, I think, and give that a good listen.
Please do. That is, I would say, probably if I had to pick one Hawkwind album, on a desert island or whatever, it's going to be Live Chronicles. I mean, my God, the recording of that is so amazing, and Hugh Lloyd Langton is in top form. I mean, my God, he's just shredding all over that thing like only he could really do. Yeah, that is a truly fantastic, just perfect slab of everything, that I could ever want Hawkwind to be if I ever got the chance to see them live. Now, I did actually see Nick Turner's Hawkwind live, which was awesome because he was just doing all that early Hawkwind stuff. And actually, Jello Biafra of the Dead Kennedys jumped up on stage and started doing it. And actually, at the time, I didn't know there was Jello Biafra, the Dead Kennedys, but we were headbanging and moshing together because I made my way right to the front. This is the only time I'm going to be able to see Hawkwind, so I'm getting up there, and this middle-aged dude's just there, and he's thrashing like only a true punk could do. I don't know who he is. I don't recognize him, but it's like, yeah, man. What song do you want them to play? I'm like, man, I really hope they play Ejection. I got to meet Nick Turner beforehand, and they shook his hand. He's like, what song would you like us to play? like, ejection, please, sir, would be amazing. And he's like, oh, then back to Jello. He's like, oh, no, man, they're not playing that. Yeah, I was like, oh, really? Oh, well, that's okay. I like it all anyway. He's like, yeah, they're not playing it on this tour. Next song, Nick Turner welcomes who to the stage? But the guy I was just hanging out with and moshing with. And what do they play but Ejection? So,
nice. Right
off the bat,
Yeah, fantastic.
Absolutely amazing.
It's funny you should mention Jello Biafra, and I think I might have mentioned this when I was talking to Ian Abrahams as well, but I didn't kind of mention this because you're the first guest I've ever had on who's talked about acid. But one of the other things we used to really, really enjoy back in the day when we were tripping was there was two things. There was a Butthole Surfers video, which was like them at home on their ranch, which was fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
And the other thing was a Ministry live video where they're playing in a nightclub and there's a wire mesh and everybody's throwing bottles at them and there's shattered glass flying all over the place. But Jello Biafra gets up and does poetry in between songs, Robert Calvert style.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is I distinctly remember that, and at the time I didn't know the Dead Kennedys were. Some of my friends were into the Dead Kennedys. Jello Biafra, to me, if you ever mention his name, all I can ever think of is tripping watching this Ministry video with him doing poetry in between I don't know, Stigmata and The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste or whatever. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Happy days.
Yeah. I mean,
fucking the idea of doing it now would terrify me. But happy days.
Yeah.
All good things, where they need to be.
There's a time and a place and a phase in one's life where that's
absolutely
a magical thing. Yeah, I don't know if I'd be so eager to jump back into that anytime soon, but that does really speak to the influence of Hawkwind.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, where did Jello Biafra get that from if not Robert Calvert?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's the thing, too. I mean, so many of these bands, obviously, from the Sex Pistols, what's his name? Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols, big, massive fan of Hawkwind. It's like, I think he has a famous quote of, like, everyone else is shit except for Hawkwind. And that really tells you something.
It does, yeah. And it, to some extent, it allows you to slightly forgive him for being... a Brexit supporting, Tory voting guy who basically is best known in the UK now for doing butter adverts.
Yeah. Well,
everybody falls off their pedestal eventually, don't they?
Yeah, it's very true. Some farther than others.
Yeah,
but there you have it.
Yeah, it's true. Well, you know what? On that acid-drenched final note, I think I'll just say it's been a real pleasure to have you on and to talk about all these things, and also to tease out of me stories about tripping back in the day for the first time on this podcast. But I really look forward to talking to you again when the next iteration of SÖNUS hits the airwaves. And of course, for everybody who's listening, find Well Done Dreamed Of on Bandcamp, but also you'll find some tracks off that album on Breakfast in the Ruins Radio.
That's right. You can find that both a listen.
Absolutely. You can find that on Radio Garden and Live Online Radio and various other places. But Dave, absolutely brilliant to talk to you and really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, the honor's mine. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh.
Okay, we're back in Derry and Tom's, and I've got with me Derek, aka Imrryr, an artist I found after our first deep dive into Moorcock and looking at his presence in musical spheres. Welcome to Derry and Tom's.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's really, really lovely to have you. Now, going back a while, when we started doing some episodes around music, I had a conversation with a dungeon synth artist known as Elric. And he bemoaned the fact that there isn't as much Moorcock in the musical stew as there was back in the heady days of Hawkwind and Blue Oyster Cult and all the space rock and the Nawabum of the 70s and 80s. So aside from already having had Dave and Nathan on, all lined up to be on the show talking about their projects, SÖNUS and Imrryr, I wanted to test this a little bit. So I had a little bit of a search around Bandcamp and came across your album fairly quickly, The Dreaming City. And of course, under the name Imrryr, I was instantly hooked. Not only that, but you describe your work as bleak electronica, so that sucked me in a little bit further because that's right up my street. And also the artwork, which I absolutely love. So welcome to the show, and I'm really, really looking forward to talking to you about not just about Moorcock, but about your work and about anything else that you're working on. It's really, really lovely to have you.
Sure, thanks. I'm glad to be here. You had reached out to me, and like not in a rude way, but I was like, oh my God, a podcast about Moorcock. This guy's gonna be like a crushing nerd, but then I listened to the first episode and like you guys, were like your conversations sort of, especially your conversation about how to say Melna Bonet was like, I never knew how to say it. I never said it out loud,
Yeah.
But you guys approach it with an attitude that is like, tongue in cheek and appreciating it for the cheese that it is. And when it's good, it's good. And when it's
yeah, absolutely. And now, don't get me wrong, hiding deep inside me, there is a hardcore nerd.
Oh, true, me too. But I also laugh about it,
Yeah. But fortunately, we have a couple along the way, and we talk about what we like, what we don't like, and we just have fun with it. And
yeah, it's good.
It's really, really great to have you on board. Now, straight away, one of the things that really interested me was the description bleak electronica.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about your music. We'll talk about Moorcock a bit, obviously. But, what drew you into music and where are your musical influences coming from in order for you to start recording this kind of music? And how would you describe it to somebody who's not accessed to your work?
It came out of, I've always played in bands. I'm mostly a bass player. I started off as a guitar player, but then everyone plays guitar. So people needed bass players. So it wasn't a hard transition. So I got, to play in more bands as a bass player than a guitar player. But I was at a point where I was at a lull of being in bands and I wanted to make music still. So I just, initially the idea was that it was going to be a one-man black metal band thing, which is, they are many, and you can throw a dart at a, wall of band names, and one of them is going to be a one-man black metal band thing. And it's also I had started writing, and it was just, it's fun to do, but it's my comfort zone. It's what I like to write, and not even what I like to listen to necessarily, which was the other problem. It was just the music I knew how to make, but I listened to far more interesting and weird music than that. So I wanted to force myself. I got rid of the guitar. I bought a little MIDI controller, and I was like, all right, this is all you can use. What can you make? What's it going to sound like? So, and then I just tried from there, and I just forced. It's completely uncomfortable making this music. It was now I feel good about it. I'm about 2 years into doing it, and I've produced a lot of music in that time, but it's all been me figuring out how to and learning how to. So it's all new to me too. So
yeah,
and I didn't know how to describe it. Bleak electronica seemed like the most accurate. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how many other people out there this would work for, but as soon as I saw it, I was like, I need some of that. I need some of that in my life. Well, one of the most fascinating things is, and of course, evidently from the moment that I spotted your work on Bandcamp, is that evidently Moorcock was in the DNA of your work right from the outset.
Yeah.
It's the artist moniker is Imrryr. The first album was called The Dreaming City. Interestingly, The Dreaming City dropped on Bandcamp in September, I think 2019, which was the same month we put out our first episode. So while you've been going along on your journey, exploring and expanding your art with the kind of work you're doing, we're kind of following a similar track with the podcast, cool. Learning as we're going along. So there's some nice symmetry there. But it's absolutely incredible to me that the Dreaming City dropped on Bandcamp in September 2019, and you've now got 18 releases on Bandcamp.
Yeah.
I mean, it may well be the case that it was perfect timing for you when a pandemic was literally unraveling the world around us. But 18 releases in a little over 18 months, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's I don't, like, this isn't my career. Like, I make music to pass the time. And sometimes when I'm more busy and more stressed at work, that just means I'll stay up 6 hours at night writing music just to like, it's like therapy. It's just processing my life. And then, I don't know, I think releasing too much too often is a bad thing, but I do it anyway because I don't know what else to do with it. I create this stuff and it's like, just put it out. I don't know. One day someone's going to listen to it. I don't like, it's not, I'm not trying to push it and trying to like have this be my life and be known for it. It's just, this is how I pass my time. And sometimes I think it's decent enough that if someone wants to listen to it, cool. Like,
Absolutely. So why Imrryr and why the Dreaming City? So what's your kind of relationship with Moorcock?
So when I was in high school still, I bought a t-shirt by the band Arcturus, who are like this avant-garde black metal band, a side project of all the guys are in other bands and whatnot. It's a common thing in that scene. But the t-shirt had an 8-pointed star on it, the Chaos Star. And at the time, I know I had seen that symbol in artwork throughout like the world of metal. Like, you see that everywhere. But I don't like to wear a shirt unless I know like what the symbols are on it, or if it has something in another language, I'll look up the translation. So I like, Googled 8-pointed star or whatever. And then I started reading about Michael Moorcock and then the characters in the world of Elric and all of the things mentioned. I was like, oh yeah, that's from that Blind Guardian song, or like, oh yeah, that's from Hawkwind. Oh, that's like it all came together. Tigers of Pentang, that like I was like, oh, this is everywhere. So that's when I read it. I was probably 16 the first time, and I think the collected works, there was a Del Rey version that came out, and so I just flew through them. It was so good. I think at the time I hadn't really been into fantasy, but that reignited that reading of fiction. I was reading a lot of nonfiction. So I mean, that was just my gateway back into reading Michael Moorcock and Eric. And honestly, I'm more of a sci-fi guy, 100%. But I struggle to find fantasy as interesting and engaging worlds as what Michael Moorcock has done. Like it's so good, and it's hard to find fantasy specifically that does. I find that sci-fi, I get more of the satisfaction out of those like messy characters.
Sure. Kind of thing. Well, of course, a lot of your other music, just going through your catalogue, recordings in Imrryr, there's a few other authors as well that you're either adapting or inspired by. A lot of Alistair Reynolds recently. Yeah,
that guy's work is awesome.
Yeah, I think it's Absolution Gap or Revelation Space I've got on my shelf, and Pushing Ice I've had on my shelf for years, and I've never got round to reading them.
Oh,
I think what stopped me was I picked them up from of all places, a garden centre. As you do with books, you find them in the weirdest places, don't you? And I picked up 3 or 4 Alistair Reynolds books and 3 or 4 Peter F. Hamilton books. And I think it was, I can't remember the name of the Peter F. Hamilton book, but I tried reading it and I got about halfway through it, which must have been about 800 pages, and realised that I couldn't remember a thing about it and put it down. And I think was totally demoralised. And the Alistair Reynolds books have been sitting there waiting for me to have a go. So I really must.
He's a little more engaging.
I really must dig into them. But also some Dan Simmons, some Frank Herbert in there as well, and also Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah.
Now, Brandon Sanderson keeps on coming up when I have conversations related to this podcast, and he's completely passed me by.
Oh yeah.
I've never read any Brandon Sanderson. I never see them in bookshops. Even I spend half my life pursuing secondhand books. I've never seen them in a secondhand bookshop. So to someone who likes science fiction and fantasy. What's the deal with Brandon Sanderson?
But for me, the thing that sells it for me is I post about this, but his magic systems that he creates. So I mean, like the stones on this guy, he's so ambitious. He has this universe called the Cosmere, and so far, each published world is taking place on a different planet, and these stories, like each world has multiple books within that world that are telling a story, but they are, at some point in time, his goal is for everything to come together.
Yeah.
So there's this one character named Hoyd who's a world hopper who shows up as, it's like sometimes he's hidden in the book. So like part of the fun of reading them is finding which guy is Hoyd. So he's
right.
this character weaving all these stories together somehow. Like I still have no idea. And it's the books there's many books and they're ongoing, and like time is passing in them. And I think I had to remember hearing that at some point, like his goal is for the technologies in these worlds to advance to the point where they like reach some sort of space travel and then they'll meet or something crazy like that. Like it's the ambition is overwhelming, but his magic systems are what's engaging. It's what makes each world unique, and they're cool, they're fun. And some of the books are a little more YA skewed, some are more high fantasy skewed. So you get a little variety in that sense, but it's great writing. He is the one who went on to finish The Wheel of Time.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So that's like how his name got out there. And then during that is when he started this Cosmere journey. It's a lot of books, but
yeah, I'm always ever so slightly into. I mean, ironically, because this is a Moorcock podcast, and you know, once you discover Moorcock, you fly down a rabbit hole and end up having to pursue it like Pokemon, and you know, pursue all the connections and all the different. I mean, at the moment, I've got a terrible habit of picking up books several times just because they're different editions and different covers from different eras. And you know, most of the Moorcock books I got were the Mayflower editions in the 70s, which I got from my granddad, which had the really wild psychedelic covers. But I'm always a little bit intimidated now at the age I'm at now of actually picking up a series of books that seem to, you know, demand a certain amount of commitment.
Yeah, well, the good thing about the Cosmere universe is that, because like for now they're all separate stories, you don't have to read all of them. Like just there's a couple one-offs. A couple of the planets only have one book in the novel. Some of them only have 3 books. You know, so you don't have to like bite into a 15-book thing. Just if you read one of the one-offs, and if you're like, oh, that's cool, then read the other one-off, and like.
Well, that sounds a lot more appealing. I remember Larry Niven being like that. I read a number of known space stories, and I was aware that they were all kind of in a shared setting. But I remember making the connection between a novel called Protector and Ringworld, which I wasn't expecting, and it was a real fantastic revelation. But you didn't need to have read them both. Whereas something like The Wheel of Time, a friend of mine, Gemma, has a friend who spent an afternoon in a park. We spent an afternoon in a park drinking, called the Dragon Boat Festival in Saltaire, of all things. Entertaining afternoon in the sunshine, having a few drinks. But she tried to sell us on the Wheel of Time stories, and I think I picked up the first couple, and there's a bit of Peter F. Hamilton going on with the Wheel of Time books as well. You look at them, they're a massive chunk. I think I read a quarter of it, couldn't remember anything about it and gave up. You know, good on Brandon Sanderson for taking that on. Yeah,
I only started the Wheel of Time because I wanted to get to the books that he's written, but I'm having such a hard time getting through it. I don't think it's good. Like, it's so crushingly boring. Like, I think the first 3 books were engaging enough, and I wanted to rip my eyes out by book 6.
Right.
And I couldn't even finish it. I had to like get the audio book because I couldn't make myself read it. So like I finished that, then I bought book 7 and I was like, all right, fresh start. And like same thing's happening. I can't. You gotta stop. I'm just wasting my own time because
my own experience of Robert Jordan is I read a couple of his Conan novels, and they work for me. Yeah, they work for me. I don't know how it's possible to make Conan really, really boring and pedestrian. And I'm sure he's a lovely fella. I don't want to be overly critical. I'm sure he's written some great stuff. But if you write Conan, I would rather read terrible, shitty pastiche Conan than someone who makes Conan really, really dull. Even the Robert Jordan Conan covers were dull. I've got a couple of the hardcover collection on the anyway. Enough Robert Jordan knocking.
Yeah.
So obviously you're a big fan of genre fiction. Just how important is genre fiction to you, like more generally?
I think I like being like, which is why I like sci-fi. I like being like floored and confused by what I'm reading and forcing my, especially because it's reading, forcing my brain to create the image that's like these ludicrous situations.
Yeah.
Like does it work for your brain while you're reading it? And then like you stop and like you reflect on like what picturing what was just described to you is insane. Yeah. And that's the fun of it for me. And I like that. It's like, it's just, I mean, it's escapism, it's whatever else is going on in your world. You pick up a book and just go to another world and travel to a different place. That's kind of like what I'm doing with Imrryr. Like I want to visit all these different worlds, these realities, all these like throughout books and everything. And that's also sort of how like why I came to the name Imrryr and being the dreaming city, because it's just like it's all these dream worlds that exist, like visiting these places, like the stuck up Melnibonian is just wasting their time traveling their dreams and stuff. Like that's what I want to do too. I get it. If I could, so that's what I'm doing with my music, and just want to go on journeys and tell tales and tell other people tales. Like I'm not writing them, but expose these cool universes that exist.
I think that's why that kind of fiction casts such a long reach across music, doesn't it? Particularly rock music, and because that's a little bit bare-chested blokes with swords fits quite nicely on heavy metal albums and everything else. But it casts such a long reach across music, and it's influenced so many people. I do remember many years ago, kind of pursuing that, not necessarily just Moorcock, but kind of getting into the fantasy, mighty feud, and science fiction, progressive and space rock kind of elements of rock music. Recoiling a little bit at the Manowar end. Although some of the videos are quite funny, but there's so much of it, and one of the things I found looking at Bandcamp, the Moorcock influence, not just the Moorcock influence, but the Moorcock influence really kind of spreads far and wide now. At one point there was a lot of it in heavy metal and heavy metal album covers and even heavy metal names like Tigers of Pantang. But the work that you're doing and the dungeon synth that Elric was doing, and there's some really interesting bands out there. One called Hawk Moon Moor, which is a strange, I think they're a Ukrainian kind of mashup of noise, doom, metal, and drone. You
posted about that, right?
Yeah.
I checked them out there. That was really good, that one.
Yeah, there's some absolutely fascinating stuff out there. But outside of things like Moorcock, where else are your influences coming from?
Like musically?
Yeah.
I think as I was writing the first album, I really wanted to focus. Like, I guess my goal was to kind of like use repetition in the way that someone like Steve Reich or Philip Glass or what I think is used in the same way a band like Dark Throne, who's an old black metal band, but there's a sort of hypnotic way to use repetition that I'm drawn to, and I'm trying to explore how to do that properly. So I wanted to take like the repetition of Philip Glass and Dark Throne, and I wanted the music to be sad, like crushingly sad, which pulling from that, I wanted it to sound like Virgin Black and My Dying Bride are two of my, Shape of Despair, it's probably the third, just sad doom metal. So it's slow. I mean, I've been doing more like sort of doom influences, doom metal influences in my music lately. Repetition, incredibly sad, and then just that electronica comes from Star of Ash is one of my favorite bands. And then I don't know if you're familiar with the band Ulver.
No.
But they're a band that started in one genre and have just changed. Like you can pick 5 albums by them and they'll sound very different. They started as a black metal band and are now sort of like synth poppy, dark synth pop, but in between they've been drone, they've been like glitch, they've done interesting things. So I wanted to take all that, and I wanted to make something that I would want to listen to, that would pique my interest in. And the top layer of it all, I wanted to have more like a Tim Hecker, Keiji Hino, I don't think I do a good job of emulating either of those guys, but I really love what they do. That's sort of more atmospheric, droney sounds.
Yeah.
So it's a big mashup, and I don't think I stick to one influence of all of them. I try and just see what comes together. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it'll only sound like one. Sometimes like the other. And I try not to like hold myself to that either, because then that's boring. Then I'm trying to sound like something. But that was like the ultimate goal. So, I mean, it was a mess. It was a lot of things. So that's why I was struggling with what to call, how to describe it. And I just bleak, electronic, and experimental seemed like the closest I could get.
Yeah. So over the last 18 months, what's the journey been like, and how do you think you've developed in terms of your own development and working with this kind of music?
I'm definitely getting better at mixing, and then all the technical aspects. I think that's been the biggest learning curve for me.
Yeah. Were you completely when you said you first got that like MIDI keyboard or piece of equipment? When you first got that, how did you approach it? Was it a brand new instrument for you? Was it a brand new way of making music? You said you were a bass player in bands. So how do you go about your what was your process like? I mean, obviously there's a creative element involved when you're a musician where you get some form of inspiration, but how do you go from 0 to 60?
So the first album and the first two albums, I at least would write something on guitar, like a passage or whatever, and then I'd have to sit there and then transfer that into onto the keyboard, which I wouldn't even do because I can't play keyboard, but I'd like punch in the notes on the MIDI. I've gotten away from that. I can now. I mean, I'll just take the keyboard and just make stuff up. Like I don't know what I'm doing at the beginning. Like I'll find a sound I like and I'll sit there and I'll play until I do something that like sounds decent, and then that becomes the basis. It's a lot of improvisation. And then I improvise until I find something I like, and then I write off of that. I'm not a musician, but I do really admire musicians, and I think my attention span is too short, and I lack application, which is why I've never learned a musical instrument. But it's funny you mentioned the MIDI thing. My old buddy Wayne, who I haven't actually seen in person for 28 years, is doing some music and scoring the journal at the end of the podcast that I've been popping at the end of the podcasts. And a while back, maybe about 3 or 4 months ago, I decided to go on eBay and maybe just get an old MIDI keyboard or something like that, and just have a play around, because I think I'd got Ableton Live Lite or something like that, and I was having a muck about, and this is why I never get anywhere, because I was on eBay and I thought, what shall I put in as a search field? So I just put MIDI. And a few keyboards came up, but the fourth thing that came up was something called George the MIDI Accompanist. And I thought, what the fuck is George the MIDI Accompanist? So I looked at it, and I ended up, long story short, I ended up buying it for 28 quid. And George the MIDI Accompanist was a bespoke unit made in the 1990s by the Royal Naval Engineering College. Pastors and padres in service could perform services aboard warships where they didn't have an organist, and it's in a bomb-proof case, and it's a bespoke metal thing that's been built into this case with knobs and dials, and a couple of speakers wired into it, and an old Yamaha tone bank basically screwed to it and attached to it as the MIDI output, which goes to the speakers. And there's a load of paperwork with it, and there's these 4 cartridges which are bespoke physical media using what seems to be some kind of old serial port. On each one there's 200 MIDI hymns. So this is why I never get to actually try my hand at making music, because was it fully operational? You can
I plugged it in. Awesome. And it works. Some of them sound like the MIDI organist is completely drunk, and some of them actually don't sound, for MIDI tunes, they don't sound too bad. So I was having to play around with that, and so actually where I should have been applying myself to actually trying to buy something useful and interesting, what I bought was some weird piece of Royal Naval Engineering history. But I kind of got off on a slight tangent here. But the paperwork that comes with it still has the handwritten notes of the pastors aboard the ships that use certain tunes that say things like "Don't use this one, it's rubbish." And it's absolutely bizarre, because you plug these little things in which are about the size of maybe half the length of an old cassette, but twice the thickness. And you plug it in, then you select the track you want by. It looks like an old-fashioned tape counter, with the wheels and the numbers on, and you push buttons to switch the numbers, and then press play. It's baffling. It's really weird, but it's such a kind of interesting thing to have. So yeah, I will never learn to play music because I'm always buying stupid shit like that. But,
yeah, that's a cool one, though.
Yeah, at some point I'll have to put a demonstration on YouTube or something.
Yeah,
that. So what are you working on now? What's next?
I'm doing some Philip K. Dick.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
If I had the time to do multiple podcasts, I would definitely do a Philip K. Dick podcast as well.
Yeah, I'd like to do some more exploring into more classic fantasy and sci-fi. So
yeah,
I've done Robert Heinlein. I did not one of his short stories.
Yeah.
So now I want to do one of my favorite. I love Philip K. Dick, so
yeah,
it's overdue visiting his brain.
Yeah, there's an interesting connection between Philip K. Dick and Moorcock as well. Funnily enough, in the UK, it was Moorcock who largely got publishers to publish Philip K. Dick material in the 60s. And he was a real kind of proponent of I don't know. I suppose it seems weird to describe Philip K. Dick as a young author, but back in the 60s, Moorcock was pushing all these kind of younger authors and interesting authors, and had quite a lot of swing with publishers. So around about the time I was discovering Moorcock as well, I was reading a lot of Philip K. Dick, and to this day I still probably put Ubik down as one of my favourite novels of all time. It's absolutely wonderful.
That's incredible, that one.
Yeah. So one of the most striking things about your work when I found it on Bandcamp was the artwork and that whole aesthetic, which I absolutely love. Is that all your work too?
Yeah, I do all the art, and I go out of my way to keep it album to album very similar.
It's a fantastic look, and it's really, really unique. I've not seen anything else quite like it.
Thanks. The like main push that I keep is I have when I did the art for the first album, it was just a pen sketch and I just scribbled. But I really love when a book has been sitting on a shelf for years, that yellowing that the paper gets.
Yeah.
And so that I took a picture of just an old piece of paper, and that's what I use as the background for every album art. And I zoom in on it and stretch it to get like different textures out of it. And that's why they all look, that color is just a yellow piece of paper.
Yeah. So what's behind all the there's like sigils almost on some of them, like the symbology?
It's specific to whatever the book or whatever universe the story is in.
Well, I really dig it. And I noticed on Bandcamp you also do like physical media.
The
as well with a little box and
the first 5 albums I have on CD, and I made little prints of the artwork. I have front and back art for every album. You can't really ever see the back artwork, because in the digital world.
This is one of the sad parts about it all, isn't it? And
absolutely,
I've got to say, Bandcamp is costing me a fortune in buying vinyl. I'm back on buying vinyl because so many people are doing like limited edition vinyl releases, and weirdly, I'm also, and I've not got nowhere to play them. I'm buying cassettes.
Cassettes,
yeah. So I've got this Immortal Sword Volume 1, UK Dungeon Synth Underground, and it's fantastic. And I couldn't resist buying the cassette. And there's a Bandcamp label called it's Bristol based. I forgot the name, but all the proceeds go to Bristol homeless charities, and they always do a unique cassette with handmade labels. Each one's unique, handmade inlays, and it's fantastic. But it's getting to the point now where I was on eBay the other day looking at vintage hi-fi separate cassette players, and I had to give my head a tap because I've got like 6 cassettes. Why do I need to drop 80 quid on an old Technics cassette deck or something?
You'll get more though once you started. It's an investment.
Yeah, probably. Well, on YouTube the other day I did actually see somebody doing a review of an old hi-fi separate, which was nothing but like an oscillator visualizer for the music with a green oscillator display. And I ended up just down an auction site rabbit hole for about 2 hours, and I couldn't find a reconditioned one for less than about 900 quid. So, right, okay, let's just stop. Now, before we go down a hi-fi rabbit hole, I've just got to say I think it's only fair that we give your Moggy, your cat, a shout out because your cat's been getting involved as well.
Yeah, that's Hilo. He's from named after my favorite character from Battlestar Galactica. So.
Is that Battlestar Galactica original or Battlestar Galactica reboot?
The reboot.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm not sufficiently au fait with the original Battlestar Galactica. I did watch the reboot and I did enjoy it, but it's such a long time since I've seen the Glenn A. Larson one. I can't remember if there was a Helo in the original.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have watched it, and it's that. I mean, it's enjoyable for what it is, but I don't ever need to go back to it.
Yeah, it's very much of its time, isn't it? You've got a question for me.
Yeah, I wanted to pick your brain. My experience of Eric, and I've read through the collections I have. I know it's a podcast, but I've this version.
Yep.
It's presented in the publication chronology, which is not chronological.
Yep.
So that's I love that. I love that complicated twist to figuring the story out. But is it, and I've reread it in this way, is it worth reading chronologically? Does it change the experience for you? Have you read it both ways?
Yeah. Now then, I'll have to scratch my brain and think back. So originally, the first Elric book I ever read, which was one of the two first Moorcock books I was ever given by Pops, was Stormbringer. He gave me the Ace pocketbook editions from the late 60s of Stormbringer. I think it was maybe the turn of the 70s, The Warlord of the Air. So the first printings in the Ace pocketbook edition. So I read Stormbringer before I read anything else. But that version of Stormbringer was abridged. So when Stormbringer was released in the 70s, in the UK, in the Panther or Grafton editions, and in the States, in the Daw editions, when they were put into chronological order for the first time, with Elric of Melniboné, Sailor on the Seas of Fate, Weird of the White Wolf, etc. By the time it got to Stormbringer, it was expanded with additional material. And this is a habit that Moorcock got into more and more over the years, as I think we touched upon previously. So I read them all in a bizarre order. I read Stormbringer first, and then over the years, I think the first one I ever bought myself with my own money was The Weird of the White Wolf, and I bought it from the Hull University bookshop. I wasn't at university by then, I was too young, but my mum worked there, so I popped into the university bookshop. Have I ever read them in chronological order? Now, in the UK, they released the Millennium editions in the 90s, which were big, handsome editions with a lot of Robert Gould covers. Really, really lovely. And once again, it mildly revised them. But when I got them, from memory, I think I may have, but I can't actually say that I definitely did. But when I got together with Phil and I encouraged her to read Moorcock, she read the Millennium editions. So at this point there was no Moonbeam Roads trilogy. So she read the Millennium editions and she read them in narrative order. But I honestly can't say whether I did or not. One thing I would say about kind of embarking on the reread for the podcast, it'll probably take us forever to get through all the Elric books at the pace we're actually going. It'll be 2037 or something. But I think the change in there's quite a significant change in the pace and tone just from Elric of Melniboné to, for example, The Dreaming City, the short story, which is in the first published short story, which is in Weird of the White Wolf. It becomes much more considered. I mean, Elric of Melniboné is still a rollicking read. You can still rattle through it at pace, but even Elric of Melniboné makes The Dreaming City seem like, almost a 100-mile-an-hour Penny Dreadful. It's still fantastic. It's still full of the incredible imagery, but it's breakneck pace. There are other authors out there who would have taken The Dreaming City and could have turned it into a 400-page book. Mm-hmm. And when Loz and I reread it, we were kind of surprised that it was only 30-odd pages, because in our minds it was so much more.
Yeah, there's so much bigger story being told.
There's so much going on there. And then when you start to introduce things like Fortress of the Pearl and Revenge of the Rose, well, Fortress of the Pearl will become, I think, is that now the second in narrative order? I'm questioning myself now. It's either the second or third. So you would read Elric of Melniboné, then Fortress of the Pearl, then Sailor on the Seas of Fate, then Weird of the White Wolf, when you come back to The Dreaming City. And that I would find that, just thinking about it, is jarring.
Yeah, it's jarring, yeah.
Yeah, incredibly jarring, because out of all of them, until the Moonbeam Road trilogy started coming out, White Wolf's Son, Skraeling Tree, which I think has been renamed now. No, sorry, Dream Thief's Daughter, White Wolf's... Dream Thief's Daughter, Skraeling Tree, White Wolf's Son. I think The Fortress of the Pearl was the hardest read of all the Elric books. I found it quite heavy going when I read it, probably in the late 80s. So we're kind of going through that period now. And my personal choice, occasionally someone will pop up on Twitter and say, which Moorcock, I want to get into Moorcock, what should I read? And my attitude is always the first one you find in a second-hand bookshop. because that's the true way.
That's the journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would love to. I read comics as well, and I've never, like, anytime I always look for collections of the graphic novel of Elric. Is there one totally to avoid? Like, cause I have no. Are they all good? Is there a crap one? Is there a...
I think it's very much about tastes.
Sure.
I quite like the Roy Thomas adaptations from the 70s, and fortunately, the Titan Comics are doing reprints of these in beautiful hardcovers at the moment. So
I think last time I checked, I saw those coming up.
Yeah, so there's the Elric ones, Corum and Hawkmoon. Also, the Swords of Heaven, the Flowers of Hell, which was like a fourth Ericos story, which he did with Howard Chaykin artwork, which is, the story's not brilliant, it's pretty short, but the artwork is absolutely beautiful. The Howard Chaykin artwork is gorgeous. I quite like the Roy Thomas adaptations. I think the artwork is a little bit Marmite for some people. I don't even know. Does a New Yorker know what Marmite means?
The spread that you put on.
Yeah, so you either love it or hate it.
Yeah.
And I know that I've not read it myself, but Hellboy, Mike Mignola, has done a Corum adaptation, which a lot of people speak very, very highly of. I still haven't got my hands on it. I quite like the P. Craig Russell art from back in the day. If I just bend down for a second.
Sure.
I do have very old collections down here. I've got Sailor on the Seas of Fate here.
That's right.
Yeah, which is, I think some of the artwork's great, some of it slightly more questionable. I'm not, for example, mad keen on his take on Coon. But, for the most part, it's okay. But I do like comics. I'm a comics fan. But, that said, I'm not a massive fan of Moorcock adaptations.
Okay, yeah.
Moorcock himself did the Moorcock's Multiverse comic, which he did some stuff with Walt Simonson. Again, beautiful artwork, some John Ridgway artwork. Really, really nice stuff. But I don't know. I think because Moorcock conjures up such vivid imagery, nobody ever captures it as well as your imagination. And I think you can get away with that with Conan, when it's just strapping warriors hacking each other to bits or massive battlefields. There's been some really fantastic Conan adaptations. I liked the Carrie Nord run by Dark Horse. I really liked all the Thomas Giorello artwork, and I think that's fine. I think it works for Conan. But for something as vivid and psychedelic as Moorcock work, I don't really think any of the artwork has done it justice. Yeah. Probably the one exception artwork-wise is, of course, I like Frank Brunner paintings, are always beautiful. There's a French adaptation of the Elric novels, which is just about to have its third volume released as a collection. Volume 1's called The Ruby Throne. It's adapted by Julie Blondell and Didier Polly. And I've got to say, the artwork is absolutely glorious. It's full painted artwork. It's absolutely phenomenal. But I'm not actually that big a fan of the adaptation, because they take quite a lot of liberties with the story. And I think one of the key things about Elric when he's sitting on the Ruby Throne and he's completely fed up of Yerkun, he kind of has a real active distaste for a lot of the Melnibonéan debauchery and habits. They take a lot of that away from him, and he's less emo and less objectionable.
Yeah.
And he's more of a true Melnibonéan in these adaptations.
Right.
And the entire reason
kind of self-hate that's supposed to motivate him more.
Yeah, the entire reason they all disliked him and Yerkun hated him is because he wasn't Melnibonéan.
Right.
He disapproved of all these things, and he only engaged them in them massively reluctantly. So whilst I kind of appreciate that they've done something with it, and actually Moorcock himself has said something along the lines of, had he written them again with what he knows now, he may well have heaved closer to Julie Blondell's take on the character. Whether that's just him being very, very generous or not, I don't know.
That was one of the things that really drew me to the darker side of this still being a fantasy, because a lot of times, even now, when I try newer fantasy stories, there's like a heroism and joy at the core of the story that it's not necessarily what I'm looking for. I like that bleak darkness that comes out of Eric, and he's still a hero, but he's kind of a shit guy, and it's just like this, surrounded by sort of shit people, and
Absolutely.
That's what makes it great, and that's what I think I would like to write more albums based on fantasy books, but I don't want them to be look at this brave soul saving the world. I want it to be, I got to find more fantasy that has that.
That's a really interesting point, though, isn't it? Moorcock's reach goes all the way across all different media, but for some reason, music generally tends to be about Elric. Elric is the one that's inspired all of these artists. Now, is it because we all identify with Elric when we're a teenager because he's a doomed hero, but he's also a bit of a Burke, so he's actually quite identifiable?
Sure.
whereas Ericos is essentially like a Nazi Uberman who's just wiping out entire civilizations for one reason or another. Corum is an articulate, urban, kind of unreachable ideal of a hero.
I'm still working my way through the Corum books, but it's not the same appeal for.
The Corum books, I think, are great because they're weird, they're psychedelic travelogues.
Yeah,
as much as anything. And Hawkmoon is like the classic PTSD wounded war veteran who's got his head down and is just ploughing through everything for the love of a woman more than anything else. And there's so Elric is by far the most identifiable character for people with a bit of a creative ilk.
I remember when I read this book, I was probably 16 or 17, and it ends with the end of the world. And it ends with what is it? Stormbringer becomes a personification and is like laughing over his corpse.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's like, I was like, oh my God. And then after this, there's all these other books that fill in all the gaps. I was like so excited. It was like, oh, this world, this is great. I can't wait to
I can still remember reading that when I was 13 or 14, and the end was like,
yeah.
It was like, what? It was absolutely incredible. So going back to your first question, there's lots and lots of adaptations out there. Probably my favourite was an unofficial adaptation of Jerry Cornelius called Saga of the Man-Elf. That's quite hard to find now, but occasionally they do pop up on eBay. It was a 6-part series, 5 or 6-part series, and Moorcock actually gave it his blessing and allowed them to use his characters because he's always been very, very generous like that, especially with the Jerry Cornelius. I don't know, what do you call it? Mythos, canon, whatever we would call it. So they're probably my personal favourites, even though the art is maybe a little bit touch and go. Beautiful covers, really nice full painted covers. But the Elric adaptations, they're okay.
Do you live in fear of someone committing a film adaptation?
Well, yeah, we've touched on this a couple of times, and
I know.
I think that there is a certain feeling of dread attached to all of that.
I don't want it to happen. I know it's.
I've been disappointed so many times with so many adaptations. I think last time I picked on the BBC War of the Worlds adaptation, and it's them that have got the History of the Rune stuff in the pipeline. So I won't pick on that again. I think I've said what I need to say about that. But I don't know. Let's think Robert E. Howard, for example. Whilst I'm a big fan of the John Milius film for what it is, it's not a good Conan film.
Sure, yeah.
Whilst I kind of enjoyed the Solomon Kane film for what it is, it's not a good Solomon Kane film. The Conan the Barbarian remake with Jason Momoa, I thought Momoa made a great Conan. I thought he was excellent.
Yeah.
He's got charisma to burn, even that early in his career. You could see that he's got charisma to burn. You could see that he was going to be a star, but the rest of it just really didn't work for me. One thing I did really like about that was if a film is going to give someone an origin story that in the books doesn't have an origin story other than the most vague background, do something interesting with it. So one thing I did quite like about the Conan the Barbarian remake was him going on the race with the egg in his mouth.
Yeah, that's a good scene.
I thought that was an absolutely fantastic scene, and it was brutal and it was violent and it worked really well. Now, I love Ron Perlman and I love watching Ron Perlman in things, but the moment I saw Ron Perlman as his dad, it just completely took me out the movie. Yeah, and it was more like a Robert Jordan take on Conan. That the fact that you've got his dad in it and he's so yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things about adaptations is they always feel a need to do backstories, don't they? Well, Elric's got the perfect backstory, hasn't he?
Yeah,
but they would still fuck it up.
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to have the choir of slaves all with their throats operated on and with their vocal cords exposed, all operated on to sing a single note in excruciating pain? Will they have all of those weird details? I don't know. Probably not, because everything's about money and appeal, isn't it? And and one thing about that you know about Moorcock, and you know about Elric in particular, is it's massively influential. It's shot through everything, whether it's George R.R. Martin or anything else, or The Witcher. Its DNA is in fantasy right across the board, just as much as Tolkien. But if you talk to a young kid these days who's 25, who's a massive fantasy fan, 95 out of 100 of them don't know who Michael Moorcock is. And that's because whilst the appeal was there for a hardcore readership, and for quite a lot of people in the 60s and 70s when these things were really, really popular, his appeal, or the appeal of his kind of work, psychedelic, violent, subversive, transgressive, it's not there for $100 million movie.
No.
I think that's the sad part of it.
Yeah, it's better left in our heads, I think, anyway.
In the same way as the comics.
Yeah.
The battle at the end of Stormbringer, how do you do that on film without a $200 million budget?
Yeah.
You know. So, interestingly, one of the Gollancz collections, which have recently been released in the UK, and I think there might have been White Wolf collections in the US, which have had some other similar stuff in. There's actually a Stormbringer screenplay that was obviously never filmed. And I've had a read through it. And actually, it's interesting enough. It's, got airships and all sorts. Nothing to do with Stormbringer the book. It's more of a kind of a mashup of the Stormbringer sword with a little bit of Ericos, a little bit of John Dacre. It's quite an interesting take.
A safer way to approach it.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting take.
The way Blade Runner is an adaptation of Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. And Blade Runner is a very good movie. Yeah. And Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is a very good book. They borrowed enough, and they also didn't call it the same thing, which was good. But they're two completely separate things. One inspired by the other, but it's not an adaptation because, I don't know, it's safer that way than if they would have called it Do Android Dreams of Electric Sheep, and then it had been this completely off adaptation. And you'd be like, well, this isn't the same thing. This, you've changed far too much, and it's focusing on totally different aspects of the story. I think more of those loose inspirations by a really good book you probably save for you, because then you're not going to necessarily, everyone's always going to be disappointed, but you're less likely to offend the fans who are let the original source be the beautiful story you have in your head, and then write a movie inspired by. I think that's safer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely spot on. I think there's possibly two ways it could work. One is that it was animated.
Oh, 100%.
Or you got some absolutely wild talent like Tarsem Singh to do it with a decent budget. but I'm not sure whether that would ever come off. But yeah, the other idea is that you do something which has all of the themes. Yeah. That it has the Black Sword, it has the John Dacre stuff, it has the Eternal Champion mythos in there. The canon, and it does something interesting with it that has hopefully has Moorcock's seal of approval, because Moorcock, I think, is more than happy for people to use his material with his blessing if he feels like he's involved, just like he did with Jerry Cornelius, with M. John Harrison and Brian Aldiss and all those other authors, just like he did with Saga of the Man Elf, comic by some unknown people who he gave his blessing to. And I think if he gave his blessing to something like that, it would be fabulous. But I don't think we'll ever get a faithful adaptation, and I don't think we should.
Yeah,
because I think it would be a massive, massive clusterfuck if they did. Yeah, I think the first time we actually heard of somebody having the rights to it was after the first Lord of the Rings movie came out, and all of a sudden the studios realised that there was huge money in sword films.
I think so, because as long as I've been into the book, I'm 35, so it's been maybe 16 is when I started. So yeah, I've always heard that it's in the works.
Yeah, but
20 years or whatever.
Yeah, it was announced. I think originally the guys who had the rights to it were the American Pie people. Yeah, thinking back, I'm sure it was them. Chris Weitz, I can't remember, but it was the American Pie people had the rights, and it just languished in development hell. And then on and on and on. And a couple of years ago, there was an announcement made that it was maybe going to go to series, but it's not been picked up. But Moorcock's latest information, which I understand somebody reported on that it posted on Facebook, is that there is a script for History of the Rune Staff, which is being done by the BBC and one of the production companies that they work with, and he really approves of it. Says it's a really strong screenplay. So maybe I think I'd probably feel slightly not exactly confident or optimistic, but I feel like something like History of the Rune Staff is probably more doable. But Who knows? Even then, are they going to go to the extremes that are in just the first half of the Jewel in the Skull? Because it's pretty wild. Yeah. It's pretty out there, children and women and families crucified along the roads to European capitals by the evil British Grand Britannian Empire So I suppose it does raise some interesting questions about the way Britain's going at the moment and whether it's quite timely to have something like that. I think it probably is. But whether the BBC can carry that off and be faithful to just how deeply kind of mean it all is. And I don't mean mean from the perspective of Moorcock being kind of just writing mean things, because you do get authors who are just a little bit mean-spirited, don't you?
Sure.
In the stuff that they write, but Moorcock writes things with a rationale. And when his villains are villainous, by Jove, they are seriously villainous. And that's one thing that you've got in there. Yeah. So, it's the whole discussion about adaptations is a really, really interesting one. And, in another universe or in a parallel dimension or an Earth 14, there is a Michael Moorcock cinematic universe that's been running for the last 12 years.
Right.
And has made absolutely shitloads of dough and keeps on rolling. But, I don't think we'll ever see it. I think it's too out there. It's too outre for mainstream. And maybe that's the way it should stay.
Right. Oh, so just to praise a really good adaptation from book to film. I don't know if you're familiar with The Expanse. It's a good sci-fi series, and that TV show is a fantastic interpretation of those books.
And of course, the two guys who have the pen name James Corey, they're up to the necks in that production, aren't they?
Yes, they are, and that's why it worked.
So even though they've made certain adjustments, or they've made some characters into they've amalgamated some people into combined characters, still works, perfect,
excellent.
And the casting was brilliant. The fact that it's the first series is a slow burn, the fact that it takes its time. The last series, you've got one character basically the entire series. She's trying to solve the problem of avoiding her own death in a spaceship where she's trapped. It's absolutely fabulous. It's brilliant television.
It is.
I think it's the best thing on
100%.
TV. Yeah, especially since Game of Thrones nosedived after the 5th season.
I was never. I don't like books. I couldn't. I tried to watch I think I watched the first season and I was like, it sucks. I don't know. It just didn't do it for me.
Yeah, I think possibly one of the reasons I enjoyed it was because it was big budget and you had people with northern accents, i.e. British northern accents. It was like, northern accents on telly. Apart from the fact that, most of them were actually northern actors. They were just putting on northern accents. Most of them did it quite well, to be fair. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole.
I don't have to get in.
Yeah,
it's one of those things when I guess in the normal world, when people find out that you read fantasy, everyone just assumes, you love Game of Thrones. I'm like,
yeah.
It's like when people find out I like metal, they're like, you like Slayer and Metallica, and I'm like, fuck, it sucks.
Yeah.
It's just
that's something I often say actually. And it's true of fantasy as well. I love heavy metal, but I hate 70% of heavy metal.
Yeah, me too.
It's the same with whiskey. I love whiskey, but I don't like 70% of whiskey. It's just one of those things, isn't it? Yeah. And I'm the same with fantasy, and I'm the same with science fiction. I will probably never forgive myself for reading the Game of Thrones books because they ate up so much time. I once lost pretty much an entire week's holiday in France to Dance of Dragons and got to the end and was like, what the fuck did I even read that for? I knew it wasn't going to conclude. I knew there wasn't going to be any kind of major payoff. But I've just wasted a holiday reading 800 pages of this. Ugh. But it's great, isn't it? The great thing about all this stuff is no matter how much you are a fan of something, there's always something that you've never come across.
Of course, yeah.
It's just like I've never read Brandon Sanderson, for example, as we mentioned previously. I've not got round to reading Alistair Reynolds, but I'm a big sci-fi and fantasy fan. But I know it's all there for when I get a moment. It's all there for me to dig into, and I think that's one of the really fun things about being a fan of genre fiction as well, is that it's just such a massive, deep ocean of stuff that there's always going to be something else out there that you really dig. And if you don't find it, and you're reading something else at the time, well, it doesn't really matter. That's why I like talking to like-minded people about it all and getting some suggestions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've already made a recommendation regarding Brandon Sanderson, but in terms of stuff like music, what are you listening to at the moment? What's inspiring you in the music scene?
The straight answer: there's this great band. I just got their album last week. They're called SÖNUS and Imrryr. Man, just go check it out, kind of thing. It's sort of journey, doom. I should probably look it up. I think it's a cellist,
right?
A drummer, maybe. Actually, I'm not even sure how they make the music that they do.
Yeah.
It's just fantastic. I like music that you can put on incredibly loud. And my favorite way to consume music is literally just like you lay on the floor and stare at the ceiling, or close your eyes, and it just there's something about it's the atmosphere, and like you get swallowed. I like in my head, I think of it as being swallowed by the sound waves. Like you can just disappear into it. That's when I get taken away like that. And that band just has nailed it on this album that they put out, the SÖNUS and Imrryr. Check it out.
I will. I'll pop it in the show notes.
You want to take
so if people want.
I like to call it music that just takes you on a mind journey kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give it a look. And what are you reading at the moment?
I just finished Bone Silence by Alistair Reynolds, which is wrapping up a trilogy of like a sort of space pirate trilogy that he was doing.
Yeah.
That was fun. And I am incredibly excited. Are you familiar with the Lunar trilogy?
No.
It hadn't been available in English. It was written in I guess, an older form of Polish. It's
right. Okay.
It's by Jerry Zalewski. It's a Polish author. It hadn't been available in English. I've been wanting to read it for years and years. I think it was written in 1908 or something. I've only heard of the story. It was there's an unfinished film called On the Silver Globe by Andrei Tarkovsky.
Right.
Who are you familiar with? Stalker.
Yeah. Yep. I made Phil watch Solaris a few weeks ago. I got the Criterion collection edition of Solaris on Blu-ray, and she said she'll never forgive me. It wasn't a cup of tea at all.
As a fan of his work, and I have seen that movie interpreted. It's missing scenes. It wasn't allowed to be finished because it was considered subversive at the time. So if you can find a copy of the DVD, it has like still inserts of like the scene was supposed to go here, and there.
Yeah.
But it's based on the first book from this Lunar trilogy story, and it only knowing the synopsis, it is one of the most creative sci-fi sort of synopsises I've read. So I can't wait to experience the story, and even how old it is. Well. It's like the prime sci-fi, like it's like story number 1, 1908, or when it was written. I should look it up, but I'm so excited to read it. So.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to look that up. Definitely going to look that up. There's some really great stuff come out of Russia in terms of books and films. Have you seen Hard to Be a God?
I just bought it. I haven't watched it. I just bought it.
That's another one.
It came in the mail the other day.
Yeah, that's another one. Phil said, "I'll never forgive you for making me watch this."
I bought that. I bought that blind. Someone posted like stills from it.
Yeah, it's absolutely superb. Every single frame of that film.
I saw they posted like 4 images, and I was like, "Oh, I don't know what that is. I'll buy it."
Yeah. I have never seen a film that is so textured. Every single frame you could just study like an album cover for detail. And the people he's got in it, even the extras, are so committed to everything they do into making that world come alive on screen. I've never seen anything quite like it. It's absolutely phenomenal. Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's been really, really great to have you on, and I really look forward to what you're going to come up with next. But is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners, just to encourage them to check your gear out?
I think if you're into reading, I try to make my music as a passive journey for your brain while you read. So it's a good throw it on, pick up a good book, and just melt away.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Now, of course, just one other quick question. You've done Elric inspired albums, and of course you did the Dreaming City, and then you did the Dreaming City Revise a little bit later. You revisited that. Why was that? Is it because you just had additional ideas that you wanted to add? Because there are new tracks on there, but there's also some which are kind of expanded from the original release. Yeah,
I wanted to, in Moorcock fashion, I wanted to reapproach some of those ideas. Yeah. And then I really wanted a song to be called Yakun the Usurper on the first album, and it just never worked out. So that was really the impetus. I just love that.
That would be a great band name as well, actually.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
It's a shallow reason, but that's why.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah. Are there any other Moorcock characters you think, or Moorcock books that you think you might adapt at some point in the future?
there probably are, but like I like to intentionally get myself stuck in dumb ideas, and I think I just might do the Dream City another time, and I want to like change the genre every time completely. So
Yeah.
I'd really like to take some, like, do the same thing, take 3 of the songs, redo them, and then add 3 more songs. But then I want the whole like taint of that one to be 70s Prague.
Mm.
And so then we'll have I have the Electronica Dreaming City, the more metal Dreaming City, then a Prague Dreaming City, and then ultimately a Doom, like full Doom metal Dreaming City. And then just keep pounding out that one idea. So,
well, that's the most Moorcockian thing of all.
I know. That's...
And actually, if you follow the true Moorcockian path, you'll still be doing this in 40, 50 years. And you'll still be rewriting the Dreaming City.
Yeah.
to apply different ideas. Yeah. Well, you know what? It's been great having you on, and everybody, you can find Derek's stuff on Bandcamp under the name Imrryr. Get my words together. I'm only halfway down my first beer. I haven't lost the power of speech yet. But it's absolutely fantastic. Is any of your previous musical?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in some band. I don't need to plug in. It doesn't matter.
But is any of it out there? On
it's out there.
Places like that. Well,
yeah, I think so.
Okay, if you don't want to plug it on here, just drop me a line afterwards and let me know, and I'm going to check it out.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks ever so much for coming on. It's been great to have you on, and don't forget, everybody, you can also catch some of the Imrryr track. God, I can't say it. Imrryr tracks. That's Moorcockian as well. Come up with names that you can't actually say 4 times out of 5. Some of that stuff's on Breakfast in the Ruins radio as well, but. For the close of this show, it'd be really, really lovely to play it out with one of your tunes off the Dreaming City or the Dreaming City Revised. Is there any one in particular that you'd like us to play?
The Moongloom second version. I love that.
Cool. Moongloom second version will be coming up at the close of the show.
Right,
okay. Cool. Well, it's been brilliant, Derek. Thanks for coming on.
It was a pleasure.
Massive thanks to Dave and Derek for popping into Derry and Tom's to talk music and all sorts of other stuff along the way. You can find SÖNUS and Imrryr at their Bandcamp pages, and I'll link them in the show notes. Up next on our itinerary, we'll be getting back to the Moorcock reread for a while, and we'll be looking at City of the Beast, aka Warriors of Mars with Phil, Phase 3 of the final programme, Finally, with Hussein, a couple of randomly rolled short stories in the actual physical company of Loz for the first time since last summer, and wizardry and wild romance with an all-new guest who's been a great encouragement and friend of the show since we first kicked off 28 episodes or so ago. Right, it's now time to thank our marvellous patrons, and we have a couple of new ones too. So, salutations to the Chaos Engineers, hard at work below decks, suffering through Brute of Lashmar's relentless jamming. God help us if he ever gets on Bandcamp. Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Van Ness, Ben Fletcher, Dave Washman, of course, Fred Quiche, Jim Kirkland, John Lays, John Timothy Watt, Mal Pertwee, Nelbert, Simon Perrins, Robbo, and Tony Malazzo. And to our Jugaderos, still arguing about who won the 5-volume set of Danish books and desperately trying to learn the rules of Favor in order to settle the issue. Alexander Harris, Clarkey, Craig Ledley, Ian Stead, Loz, Taylor, Matthew Broom, Miles Reed-Labato, much love to you and the Mrs. Miles, Randall Gatlin, Stephen Round, and Tom Murphy. And thanks too to the occupants of the spaces between the tiers, Tim Cardos, and, brand new, Sebastian Weetabix. And finally, of course, to our patron demons, ever patient, awaiting their time in the ascendancy as the cosmic balance swings back and forth. Anthony Piconti, Ed Scott, forger of the Blade of Arizona, Graham Holden, aka the Duck Pond Sailor, and Apkalu of Enmakar, both on Bandcamp by the way. Paul Hillary, aka Coinbiter, ever looking to trim your spending, with a Lormerian sea axe. Gemma, aka Mortmain. Nathan, aka Core and Metal, on Bandcamp. Neil Burton, the Stickmaster. Joe Monty, and once again a reminder that the marvellous looking Saga Press editions of the Elric Saga, Care of Joe, are available for pre-order now and releasing from September. Bob McMillan. Bob, we need to think of a way to tie Bob Dylan into Moorcock, no matter how tenuous, so we can talk about Haiku 61 Revisited in Derry and Tom's. Norman Beresford, the Baker on the Rocks, and of course, the OG patron. Gareth Wilson, the Cursed Monkey Hand, an upper of pledges, joining us in the patron demon tier. And finally, joining the exalted, a new patron demon, Will Jameson. Will dropped me a line to tell me about his history with Moorcock. Will said, "My first exposure to Moorcock was through D&D. A box of old books found in the back of the closet after my older brother went to college included a copy of Deities and Demigods, the older version with the Lovecraft, Lieber and Moorcock bits. I'd never heard of any of them, but the illustrations were captivating. Sometime later, a used bookstore opened in town, a little concrete bunker of a building run by a pipe-smoking, overalls-wearing old man in the Gary Gygax Ed Greenwood mould. It was the first one I'd seen that had a fantasy section on purpose, obviously curated instead of shelved with distaste behind racks and racks of romance novels. I knew the guy was legit because he also had a wire rack of new TSR books on the wall by the register. Anyway, I found a copy of Elric of Melniboné, the Silver Race edition with Robert Gould art. I was hooked, and the timing was perfect. The first 6 Ace Elrics were still on the shelves, so I burned through those to the traumatic conclusion, and, soon after, the White Wolf Eternal Champion Omnibus editions started coming out. It felt like a golden age for getting into Moorcock, and the treasure hunt for the ones I don't have continues to this day. I can honestly say, Will, that the hunt never ends, and my own shelf continues to expand and grow as I find new editions and covers that I have to possess. And on the subject of Robert Gould, Phil and I were in Morecambe a few weekends ago, and there's a terrific bookshop in Morecambe called the Old Pier Bookshop, and I picked up one of those marvellous Millennium editions in hardcover with a beautiful Robert Gould cover. And that reminds me, Simon Perrins and I have been having a discussion about covering the subject of Moorcock and art in an upcoming episode. More on that later. Will's Dungeon Synth work as Puddleglum is on Bandcamp. Check it out. It's another brilliant example of how essential Dungeon Synth has become to the world of Electronica. Okay, enough of my yakking for now. We'll be playing out this show with Moonglum from the Dreaming City Revised by Imrryr, so stay tuned. Until next time, you can gab with and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the handle @BreakfastRuins. You can email the show at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The blog is breakfastintheruins.com, and we have our Patreon page too, and that has a few Patreon exclusives. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.